parents letting me know they wanted to visit on Sunday just to check in and spend some time with us being the straightforward man I immediately agreed and told them it was a great idea. Family is important to me, and I figured a quiet Sunday at home with my parents sounded perfect. After hanging up, I told my wife about it. She didn't seem to mind, simply saying, "Okay, that's fine," and went back to whatever she was doing for me. It was just another normal start to the weekend. Later that afternoon, something odd happened. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard her phone ring. The sound itself wasn't unusual, but her reaction was she practically jumped out of her chair as if the call was some emergency. Before I could even ask what was going on, she darted toward the KN. With her phone in hand, that kind of urgency was enough to catch my attention, so I got up and followed her. When I got closer, I could hear her speaking in a hushed voice. She wasn't just being quiet, she was whispering so softly I could barely make out a word. I leaned on the doorframe and asked, "What's going on? Who's calling?" She gave me a quick glance, waved her hand dismissively, and mouthed, "Later." That didn't sit right with me. What could be so secretive that she had to whisper like that? I stood there for a moment, debating whether to press the issue, but decided to let it go. She'd explain herself eventually, or at least I hoped she would. For now, I returned to the living room, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something strange was unfolding. The conversation didn't end quickly either. She stayed on the phone for nearly an hour, an entire hour of whispering. By the time she finally hung up, I was no longer just curious, I was irritated. "What the hell was that about?" I asked as soon as she reappeared. "Who on earth were you talking to for that long, and why were you whispering?" She looked at me with that casual, unbothered expression that drives me up the wall sometimes and said, "Oh, that was about tomorrow. We're going to have some guests that set me off." "What do you mean guests? My parents are coming over tomorrow. Did you forget about that?" I could feel my temper rising, though I kept my tone steady. Her reply didn't help. "Yeah, I know, but these are secret guests," she said, as if that explained anything. "Secret guests?" I repeated, now genuinely annoyed. "You're kidding, right? Who are these people and why are they coming here of all places? Did you even think to tell me before agreeing to this?" She sighed as if I were the one being unreasonable and said, "They're friends of mine." "Well, sort of. I met this woman online a couple of weeks ago on a forum about hobbies and fun stuff, and we really hit it off. She and her husband are coming to visit. They're unique, and they've got something big they want to share. Oh, and they're bringing us a special gift." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So let me get this straight. To complete strangers you met on the internet are coming to our house to sit with my parents, and you think this is a good idea?" My voice was calm, but the anger was bubbling beneath the surface. She nodded, unflinching. "It's not that big of a deal. I've already invited them, so it's happening. You'll see, it'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had already made the decision without consulting me, and now I was supposed to just go along with it. My jaw tightened as I fixed her with a hard stare. I didn't say another word. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there. In my head, all I could think was, who the hell are these people, and how is this supposed to work? I had a sinking feeling this wasn't going to end well. Sunday arrived, and with it came my parents. As expected, they were punctual, dressed in their usual conservative attire, bringing along a homemade pie and their usual warm but formal demeanor. My parents are the kind of people who value tradition and propriety above all else, and I've always respected that about them. As they settled into our living room, I could tell they were glad to be here, and I hoped it would be a peaceful afternoon. I kept glancing at my wife, silently praying that our secret guests would find some reason not to show up. Maybe they'd forget, or maybe the universe would intervene in some miraculous way to spare me the headache. The first hour passed smoothly enough. My mom complimented the curtains, my dad asked me about work, and my wife seemed content, even cheerful. It was a rare moment of calm, but as if the universe had heard my earlier thoughts and decided to spite me. The doorbell rang. The sound shattered the peace like a rock through a window. My father glanced at me and asked, "Are you expecting someone else?" Before I could respond, my wife was already halfway to the door. "Oh, I forgot to mention," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, "you're not the only guest we'll have today." My father raised an eyebrow, the lines on his forehead deepening. He's a man of few words, but that look spoke volumes. My mother, ever the picture of composure, Saturday up straighter, clearly intrigued but not yet alarmed. Meanwhile, I could feel a note forming in my stomach when I turned to see who was at the door. I nearly lost my composure there. They were the secret guests my wife had been so eager to host. The woman wore pink tights, a miniskirt that looked like it belonged in a high school wardrobe, and a crop top that barely covered anything. Her husband wasn't much better, with his long hair, ripped jeans, and a t-shirt featuring some obscure rock band. They looked completely out of place, like characters from a bad sitcom. My wife greeted them with a sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. She looked thrilled, as if royalty had just arrived. Meanwhile, I turned to my mom and saw her pale visibly. My dad's expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to disbelief. Before I could even react, the guest stepped inside carrying a large, brightly wrapped gift. They introduced themselves cheerfully, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. My wife ushered them into the living room, where they placed the gift on the coffee table and announced, "We brought something special for you all." The moment my wife began unwrapping the gift, I knew it was a mistake. Inside was a collection of items that I won't describe in detail, but let's just say they were anything but appropriate for a family gathering. My father's jaw tightened and my mother looked like she might faint. I grabbed the box, muttered a thanks, and carried it out of the room before the situation could get any worse. I placed it in the hallway, far from everyone's view, and returned to find an awkward silence hanging in the air. We all sat down, and my father, ever the disciplinarian, tried to make polite conversation, but it was clear that things were already spiraling. The guests, oblivious to the tension, smiled and whispered to each other, completely at ease. Then came the moment that sealed the disaster. The man from the couple leaned forward and said, "Remember how we talked about making a big announcement?" My wife nodded. Eek. "Well," the man continued, "we've decided to open up our marriage, and we thought this would be the perfect time to share that with everyone." The room erupted. My father, who'd been holding his tongue all evening, could no longer contain himself. "That's not openness," he said sharply. "That's adultery, plain and simple." The debate quickly escalated into a full-blown argument, with voices rising and tempers flaring. My mother, who had confrontation Saturday, frowning, clutching the armrest like a lifeline. The guests tried to defend their lifestyle, but my father wasn't having any of it. At one point he stood up and said, "If I were your age, I'd have knocked some sense into you by now, but I'm smarter than that, so we're leaving." I escorted my parents to the door, apologizing profusely, as my father gave me a look I'll never forget. It was the kind of look that says, "You've really screwed up this time." No words were necessary. The shame hit me like a ton of bricks. After they left, I stood at the door for a moment, staring out into the night, wondering how this day had gone so disastrously wrong. Then, with a heavy sigh, I turned and walked back inside, bracing myself for whatever was to come next. My wife had brought the box back into the living room, and I couldn't believe my eyes as she started pulling out its contents and lining them up on the coffee table. It was bad enough that my parents had witnessed this circus the day before, but now she was treating it like a display at a trade show. I stood there for a moment, watching in disbelief, before turning to the couple, who had just finished making themselves comfortable on our couch. "You couldn't have waited until another time, maybe told us privately. This whole thing was poorly timed as it is, and you've managed to make it worse by showing up on the same day as my parents." My tone was firm, leaving no room for ambiguity. Instead of taking the hand, my wife shot me a glare. "Stop ruining what's already ruined," she snapped. "You're not making things any better by harping on it." Her defiance was startling. Before I could respond, she grabbed my arm and dragged me into the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said through clenched teeth. She folded her arms and waited. "This can't go on. You've invited people into our home without consulting me. They caused a massive fight with my parents, and now you're defending them like this is all normal. This needs to stop." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "You're